All right, guys, another drive to work, another talk about boxing. Let's talk about Errol Spence Jr. versus Danny Garcia. But before we get into that, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Really like sub to the channel because that is what helps me out the most. And when you sub, hit that notification bell. That way you can get updated when I drop the newest content like this. Now, I've really been holding off on the Errol Spence Jr. breakdown of this fight because this is a very hard fight for me to even do a prediction on. So I'm not really going to do a prediction, but I'm going to talk about what I think will happen hypothetically as long as Errol Spence Jr. is 100%. Here's the problem that I'm having, and I'm going to get out the problems first, and I'm going to tell y'all how I think the fight should go. So the problem that I'm having is this. Errol Spence Jr. was in a very bad car accident, all right? Now, people want to say, oh, he just got a couple of bruises and some teeth. That's not really true, because I remember reading an article about this a while back when the wreck first happened, and it said that Errol Spence Jr. was induced into a coma. So it was a lot more than bruising and a couple of teeth needing to be replaced, because when they induce a coma on you, it's normally due to brain swelling, which means that you took a lot of traumatic stress to the head. So with that being said, I do not know where his true health is as far as being punch resistance. Can he take a hit? I do not know. I know he got hit hard by the pavement after being ejected from the car. So by that, it's very hard to break down what's going to happen in this fight. Also, with that being said, you know, I understand that they said he's been sparring, but there's zero sparring footage being released of him actually sparring. And that's another concern of mine, because I've seen him spar before, especially leading up to fights. I've seen footages released on YouTube. I mean, it's not out the norm to see that. However, with this, there's been zero released footage. Now, physically, he looks good. His body looks really good. In fact, I would say that looking at him in his open sparring workout before the fight that he did, physically, he looks to be in about the best shape that I've seen him in. I won't say it's his very best, but it's up there with his very best. Like, he looks really, really good. His lungs look really, really good. I didn't see much slowing down whenever he was throwing punches in the open sparring. So all that looks good. Now, the real question comes down to is, can he take a hit? And why the hell is he fighting Danny Garcia? Because I think Danny Garcia is too tough of a fight after coming off of an accident like that. And I have some theories about that. But before I get into those theories, there's another thing I want to bring up too. Even if Errol Spence Jr. is 100%, he can take shots to the head 100% like he used to be able to take, and they're not really that effective to him because he can just absorb them no problem. Here's the other aspect of it that people aren't thinking about. How much ring rust does Errol Spence Jr. have? How long did it take him from the wreck to be able to train again? How long did it take him, if he is sparring, to get in there and actually spar and put in some rounds? Now, I'm not saying sparring is the be-all, end-all, because there are professional fighters like Sergio Martinez who didn't even spar. So I'm not saying that you have to spar to be ready for a fight, but he's the type of guy that does spar in the gym. So how long did it take him to get in there and spar? See, these are questions that nobody knows, and we won't really get the answers to until fight night. And because of that, again, I cannot make a prediction. Now, my theory on this fight is this. The PBC's outlook at this fight. I feel like they should have put Errol Spence Jr. in there with a tomato can. But this is why I feel they didn't. And I could be wrong. I'm saying that right now. This is just my hypothetical theory based on nothing but my own thoughts. My thought is this on this fight. I feel the PBC is putting Errol Spence in this fight because this is the reason. One, they have Sean Porter nipping at the heels of Bud Crawford as is mandatory. So that's somebody that Bud is going to have to fight, okay? Outside of Sean Porter, who is the best fighters that the PBC has in the welterweight division? Well, of course, that would be Errol Spence Jr. And then who's right behind them two? Danny Garcia. So if Bud beats Porter, what does the PBC do to stop Bud from taking all the belts? Well, if Spence isn't the same, you got to put in the next best guy, and that's Danny Garcia. So I feel like they're accelerating him to fight Danny Garcia because they don't want to risk Errol Spence not being the same guy, getting in there with a guy that he should beat normally and then losing to him, and then Bud picking up that belt real easily off a guy that should have never beat Errol Spence Jr. So that's why I feel that they're pushing him in there. Danny's their greatest chance outside of Porter and Spence at beating Bud, and they don't want to risk him losing to a tune-up, so they're just going to push him out there with Danny so they can hopefully retain their belt if Danny beats Errol, and then hopefully for them, he can beat Bud if it comes down to that. Sorry again, guys, like this car is all around me, that's why I paused. But so yeah, that's what I think the thought process is of the PBC, and I don't like it at all because, like I said, I really truly believe that nobody would have been mad at Errol Spence Jr. for taking a tune-up. I don't believe anybody would be mad. Like, he came off of a wreck like that, and it's not like, I mean, outside of Bud, you can't really say that anybody's been avoided. And people can argue that Bud hasn't been avoided, and I don't want to get into the argument. I'm just saying that you cannot really say that Errol Spence Jr. is a ducker and a dodger. You can't really say that, okay? Just take Bud out the welterweight. There's nobody else that you can show that he's ever ducked or dived or dodged. The 5D's the dodgeball. He's never done that. So, you know, if he would have taken a tune-up, I don't think anybody would have been upset. It's understandable. And I don't like the fact that he's getting there with Danny. Now, with that being said, had the car wreck never happened, I give Danny Garcia very little chance at beating Errol Spence. I don't think he could have beat him. I just don't. Because Danny Garcia is the type of fighter that makes Errol Spence Jr. look best. A guy that stands in front of you, comes forward, and doesn't have a lot of head movement. See, Danny Garcia's got a good guard. He can turn his body a little bit to try to bounce shots off of his shoulders, catch them on his forearms. But overall, he's a very come forward, stand in front of you style fighter. And he prides himself off of his chin. Now, they like to say that he's got six-toe power and he's a very hard hitter. But what true welterweights has Danny Garcia knocked out? I don't believe he's knocked out any true welterweights at all. I really don't. So I don't see him having this devastating power that so many people try to say that he does, because the knockout ratio just doesn't match that. It just doesn't. Like, if he had this type of power that people are trying to make out that he has, then he would have a lot more than, I think it's a 60% knockout ratio. And then he would have been knocking out true welterweights, which, again, I don't believe he's ever knocked out a true welterweight. I'm not talking about a guy from 140 moving up. I'm talking about a guy who started at 147, a true welterweight. I don't think he's knocked any out. So I really have doubts about how powerful those punches are. I don't care what Keith Thurman said about, oh, it was the hardest shot that I ever felt on my shoulder. I don't care about that. That's BS. Manny Pacquiao knocked him on his ass. An old Manny Pacquiao at that. So that doesn't really mean much to me. So, again, I think Danny Garcia is a tailor-made style fighter for Errol Spence Jr. Errol Spence Jr. does not do bad against guys who come forward who are very straight up and down. See, what Errol struggles against is guys like Mikey Garcia who go into flight mode. See, the reason why people wanted to say that, oh, Errol can't hit hard because he didn't knock out Mikey, and that's not really true. He started hurting Mikey, and then Mikey, what did he do? He went into flight mode and tried to stay away from him for all the rounds. And Errol Spence Jr. wasn't very good at cutting off the ring. He couldn't really catch Mikey Garcia when Mikey Garcia went into flight mode to be able to put him away. Because if Mikey Garcia would have stood in the center of the ring, I guarantee you, he wouldn't have made it through the end of the fight. Mikey did what he had to do to survive all 12 rounds, but he was outclassed, outsized, outgunned, and that's the only reason why Errol Spence Jr. didn't knock him out, was because he went into flight mode. And again, like I said, he doesn't look the best at being able to cut off the ring when people are moving away from him. So I think that's the style fighter that causes him the most issues. I've seen other guys, when they go into flight mode, he has problems targeting them. Now, flight mode's not going to cause you to win the fight, but my point is this. The type of guy that would give Spence the hardest types of troubles is going to be an outside sharpshooter that's not going to come into the pocket. A guy who's taller, rangier, and can get in and out and move before Errol can get off shots. That, stylistically, in my opinion, is his weakness, and Danny Garcia is not that. Danny Garcia is everything that Errol Spence Jr. wants. He wants to be able to trade in the pocket. He wants you to come towards him. He wants to be able to use his size and strength. He wants to get up close in the clinch, and that's exactly what Danny's going to give to him. Again, I believe Danny Garcia is by far a top 10 fighter, but I don't think he's an elite welterweight. I think he's remained a top 10 welterweight, but I don't think he's elite. I mean, I don't know. If him and Keith Thurman were to fight again, he might get Keith Thurman, because I don't think Keith Thurman is the same that he used to be. After all the injuries, I think he deteriorated pretty bad, and he's aging pretty accelerated. But I would even go as far as to say that Danny is probably a top 5 guy. Yeah, I would say that. Well, let me think. We got Errol Spence, assuming that he's the same after the wreck, who people want to put number 1 at welterweight. I'm cool with that. We've got Manny Pacquiao, who is older, but he's still winning. He's still showing that he can fight young guys like Keith Thurman, so you have to put him at number 2. And I'm putting him at number 2 because I believe Errol Spence Jr. could beat Manny Pacquiao. Now, at number 3, I put Bud Crawford. Now, I believe Bud could also beat Manny, but Manny has done so much at welterweight, I cannot put Bud in front of Manny Pacquiao for welterweight. So that's my top 3 guys. Behind that, I would put Sean Porter, and then I would have to put Danny Garcia. Now, I know a lot of people could argue Ugas over Danny, but if Ugas and Danny were to fight right now, I think Danny could get him. So I think Danny is a top 5 fighter, but I don't think he's a world champion. I don't think he could beat any one of the 3. I even think Pacquiao would be able to dance around him because of his straight up and down. And I'm not trying to throw shade or hate on Danny. The thing is, Danny is a good boxer, but in my opinion, his style, the way he fights, is tailor-made to all the strengths of Errol Spence Jr. And if Errol Spence Jr. loses, I chop it up to him losing because of the car wreck. I'm not trying to say that, well, I guess I am saying Danny doesn't really get a lot of credit from me for this fight, because in my mind, and nobody can change my opinion, I don't think in 100 years, had that car wreck not happened, that Danny would have beat him. 100 out of 100 fights, I believe Errol Spence Jr. would have beat Danny and done it pretty convincingly. I don't even think people could argue that, oh, it's a robbery. No, I don't even think it would be a close fight. I think that Errol Spence's pressure and power would be too much for Danny, and his chin would be truly checked. And it might still get truly checked, and I could be wrong. Errol Spence might look amazing in this fight, and he could be 100%, but again, I can't see the future. I don't have a crystal ball, and nobody can see the future, and nobody knows, not even Errol Spence Jr. knows where his head's at. Because even if he's been sparring, I was talking to somebody about this. I've been in world champion gyms, or I've been around world champions in gyms whenever they were preparing for fights, okay? I've watched them spar these grueling, killing rounds, and they're not. They get sparring partners in there, but here's the thing. Sparring partners, whenever you're getting ready for a fight, they're not trying to kill you. Because if they do try to kill you, then you end up with AJ, with a concussion, going into a fight with a concussion, and then getting knocked out in that fight. So that's why sparring partners don't go at the person that they're training or training with to kill them. Because what happens if they cut them? You know, just because you're wearing headgear and gloves doesn't mean you can't get cut. You can. What happens if you suffer a broken rib? What happens if any type of injury happens to you? Well, then the fight's off. So there's a level of holding back that sparring partners have to do. And with me saying that, when Danny goes in there against Spence, he's going to be trying to take his head off. He's going to be trying to kill him. There's not going to be any holding back. This is going to be a fight, because that's what it is, a fight. And that's why I'm saying that nobody knows, not even Errol Spence Jr. himself knows what's going to happen when he gets hit that first real time. And Danny's going to land clean shots. He's going to. I just don't believe Danny pre-accident had enough power for his clean shots to actually hurt Errol Spence Jr. because of how tough he is. I give Errol that. He's got a good chin too. He's able to walk through guys. He's a strong guy. He's always been a strong guy and a big guy. So I give Errol Spence Jr. credit. I would still love to see the Bud Crawford fight. You know, I'm not going to get into my opinions on who I think would win that fight because he's got to get through Danny first. So I will conclude this. I will not be watching the fight. I know I put up highlights for all my new subs to see, but this fight, I probably will not have highlights to put up because I do not want to watch it. And the reason why I do not want to watch it is because I do not know Errol Spence Jr.'s health. And because of that, I don't want to watch a guy end up like Patrick Day. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not saying that, you know, he's at risk of that happening, but there is a possibility. And I don't want to see it. So because of that, I personally will not be getting the fight, but I'm not trying to say don't get the fight. Both these guys, Danny Garcia and Errol Spence Jr., deserve your money. So if you want to see the fight, by all means, buy the fight, watch the fight, enjoy the fight. And if Danny beats Errol Spence Jr., I'm not holding it against Danny that he won. Danny could not control that Errol Spence got into a car wreck. He could not control that. There's nothing Danny did to make that happen. So therefore, if Danny beats him, he deserves to be champion. But coming back to my original thought, I just don't believe, had the accident not happened, that Danny would ever beat him. So even though it sounds like I'm not giving him credit, I'm still giving him credit because it's not his fault that it happened. It is what it is. He's in the ring with him, and if he beats him, he beats him. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. There's no getting around it. He's the true champion. So let me know what y'all think in the comment section. Do y'all think I'm off base? Do y'all think, oh, there's no way that Errol Spence is going to get hurt? He's 100%. Do y'all think that, no, you're wrong. You're really wrong. Danny Garcia could have beat him before the car wreck, so if he beats him after the car wreck, then that's why he's going to beat him, because he would always have beat him. If that's your mindset, let me know. If you agree with me, where you're saying that, I don't really think that 6 toes is going to help Danny out a lot. I don't really think that no-look hook really would help him against Errol Spence Jr. He would eat it and just keep coming. If you agree with me, then let me know in the comment section. Thank y'all again for watching. I really do appreciate it.